Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on Jay Slay Made in the USA, where we explore truth, expose deception, and inspire courage. Guys, tomorrow's show is going to be incredible. It's probably one of the most fascinating people that I have ever met. His name is Jason Jones. He's the president of the Vulnerable People Project. And believe me, this ties into the thumbnail. It ties into why you've tuned in. But Jason's going to be coming on my show tomorrow. He's been a longtime leader of the pro-life movement, actually one of the first guys, and I'm just giving a brief overview, one of the first guys arrested outside of a Planned Parenthood for protesting. He's worked with the Trump administration and campaign. I'm sorry, the campaign. And he's good friends with Eric Metaxas, so keep that in mind. But he's also been given a humanitarian award from the Taliban. That Taliban. Yes, seriously. So if that sounds like a conflict of interest or, oh, that doesn't compute, just wait till you see what happens with not computing. The Vulnerable People Project, which he's the founder and president of, is all about helping vulnerable populations around the world. So he was one of the first on the scene in Lahaina, Hawaii. I think that's how you say it, Lahaina. After the fires that happened, helping people restore their lives. He's been in war zones across the world. He's going to Syria very soon after our interview tomorrow. But he spent the bulk or the majority of this past year, obviously, with vulnerable populations in Gaza, helping the children and the people there that aren't in the fight at all, but they're underneath the steel of these bombing campaigns. So what's really interesting here is, so that's Jason. Let's set that aside. Now, Eric Metaxas, I got to say, I've liked Eric a long time. I've got his books. This is Bonhoeffer, the 400-page beast. I've read that all the way through. Eric Metaxas with Miracles. I've heard Eric speak in public, in person many times. I've hung out with him a couple times. He may not even remember me, but, at various events. And I've had one time on a group phone call where we did a Q&A and I had kind of a back and forth with him. So I've respected Eric. I like Eric. I love Eric. I think he does a lot of good on the issue of Israel and Christian Zionism. He's known as one of the leaders. Okay. So on the thumbnail, for this video, you saw a picture of me with my arm kind of around Eric there. And, man, that was at NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. He's been at the last two, and Eric's kind of the belle of the ball there. He'd be embarrassed to probably hear me describe it that way, but that's just how it is. He's a Christian intellectual. And, I got to say, at those NRB conferences, what struck me, and this was 2 years ago, if you didn't know any better and you just walked into that convention, it's a Christian, they call it religious, but it's a Christian broadcasters event. You would legitimately think it was a Jewish event if you didn't know any better. Yes, there's Bibles there and things like that, but the majority of the symbolism, there's rabbis walking around. You've got Star of Davids everywhere. I'm sure some of that has been exacerbated, at least this last year, by the war. But it probably comes as no surprise to my audience that it's that way and why it would be that way. But Eric is a staunch defender of Israel. He, like I said, Christian Zionism would be high up on his list, even though he probably wouldn't describe himself that way. It's obvious that he is. So I was shocked in my phone conversation with Jason Jones the other day. He's telling me his story, and what I said so far, it just barely scratches the surface on this guy and what he's done. He told me, he's like, "Oh, I'm great friends with Eric. Eric's a great guy. I was just on his show and I challenged him on some of these things, and I challenged him about Israel, and I challenged about the bombing program and what they're doing." And I'm going to save it for what you're about to watch, because I'm going to play the interview. But as I listened to him, I was like, okay, this guy's just talking a big game. He probably really didn't say these things to Eric because it would have been too much of a conflict of worldviews. And so I found the interview and I watched it and I was like, well, he really did. He really went there. And I got to say, I've been wondering a long time, guys like Eric, who are as intelligent as he is. He's an author. He's, I think he's a researcher. I don't know how much time he has for actual research these days, but, I've wondered in the past, do they really know that much, or are they so insulated in a bubble? And I kind of thought, they have to know the truth. They have to know the truth about maybe 9/11. They have to know the truth about what really happened on October 7th in terms of the Mossad and Israeli government knowing it was going to happen. I mean, that's been reported multiple times by Israeli sources for those who aren't familiar. So, Israeli news sources, I've got like 3 articles. Between Jerusalem Post and Times of Israel and others that talk about how Mossad, Shin Bet, and the secret services of Israel knew that this was going to take place and the response time. And I've wondered, could Eric have known? Does he know this? And I thought he has to know. He has to be playing a game here to continue to support Israel unflinchingly. And after watching this interview and talking to Jason, I realized I think he's just so insulated and such a leader. And you think about people who become leaders of a corporation or leaders of a movement, it's a very unpopular thing to challenge them on their beliefs. So people stop doing it. People become afraid to do it. And I think this is a perfect case in point of a guy who's a leader in his field, and then a Jason Jones who's a leader in his field, who's got boots on the ground and is talking about what he's seeing. And you're going to hear what this is in a minute. And these guys are friends. And Eric cannot understand what he will not understand. It's a matter of will. Now, at the end of playing this interview, I'm going to come back with some more thoughts because I'm proud of Eric. Eric had Jason back on his show again to talk about Syria and how Christians are now under attack of radical Islam, Al-Qaeda, and the others in Syria, which is a much more comfortable thing for Eric to talk about. But I saw Jason still kind of needling him on some issues, and Eric was beginning to open his mind a little bit to maybe not being always right about geopolitical things and even things that he held strongly to 20 years ago after 9/11. So there may be an awakening happen here, but this is a case study of cognitive dissonance that I'm about to show you right now. And Eric, if you happen to see this, all respect for you, brother. I've appreciated your work. I think you do great things. I think you're wrong on this issue in certain ways. And I'd love to come on your show and talk about it sometime. So with that,
folks, the one, the only, Jason Jones. Jason, welcome back.
It's great to be back, but there are a lot of Jason Joneses, Eric Metaxas.
Listen, I know 2 other Jason Joneses besides you. We're going to have one of them on later this week. He spells his name Jaeson, and he's going to be talking about the border. It's like next level, unbelievable conversation, but that's a different Jason Jones. I'm also friends with the publicist, Jason Jones. I just saw him recently. But you, Jason Jones, you have a credential that no one else has. You're good friends with John Zmirak, and that trumps everything. So there's a lot I want to talk to you about. We don't have a ton of time. I want to talk about the mass conversion of Hindus in India that has escalated the persecution of Indian Christians. I want to talk to you about a little bit what's going on in Israel. I want to talk to you about anything else. Where do you want to start?
Well, Eric, I really appreciate that. It's been a very tough year for Christians around the world. Last September, a year ago, this month, we saw the complete ethnic cleansing of Armenian Christians from Artsakh. We have the civil war in Sudan that's disproportionately affecting Christians. 9 out of 10 Christians in the world martyred this year will be martyred in Nigeria. Of course, the war in Ukraine. And now we have in Gaza and the West Bank, Christians suffering persecution. So, Eric, I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this.
Well, help me understand what's going on, because everybody knows I'm pro-Israel. What Hamas did was satanic and deserves you have to go after them, and they're evil. But you're telling me that there's quote unquote, collateral damage affecting Christians. So explain this to me.
Yeah, one of the most beautiful thinkers of the past 100 years would have to be Hannah Arendt. And she wrote a beautiful essay on the excesses of Zionism. She was a Jewish woman, student of Heidegger's, escaped Germany, barely snuck past the Gestapo, was a powerful writer. And she said, nothing hurts me more than when my own people do evil than when others do evil. And there's no denying that the response of the government of Israel to October 7th has been disproportionate and devastatingly tragic to the Christian communities. When we look back at the U.S. response to 9/11, everyone can agree that the Bush administration undermined our interests, undermined our security. Iran controls Iraq. We saw the rise of ISIS in the wake of our withdrawal. The Taliban is back in control of Afghanistan. Al Qaeda is bigger and badder and scarier than ever, operating across all of Afghanistan. And so, with thousands of casualties and trillions of dollars, our response to 9/11 set us back. And tragically, I think it's going to be obvious to everyone. It should be obvious already, but that Benjamin Netanyahu's response to October 7th is undermining the long-term security and interests of the people of Israel. But what is happening specifically to Christians is devastating. Now, there have been 15,000 children who have died since October 7th in Gaza. Every Christian church has been bombed multiple times. Every Christian hospital and every Christian school has been bombed. We've seen.
Okay, now listen, I can't just let this go. I do not believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to war with Christians and deliberately killing Christians and deliberately bombing churches and so on and so forth. In other words, what is the explanation for this? I don't understand.
Yeah, it is hard to believe, but I mean, I can give you one example. On December 16th, 2023, Mother Teresa's Order, the Missionaries of Charity, was attacked directly by artillery. On October 7th.
Why? I do not accept what you seem to be implying, that this is intentional somehow, that this is Jews going to war with Christians. I don't get that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Eric,
explain it.
On December 16th, 2023, two Christian women, while in church, Catholic women, were shot by snipers. When men came to rescue them, the 7 men were shot by snipers. Just this past weekend, an American woman was shot and killed by a sniper in the West Bank. In the West Bank, if you go to our website, freealice.org, you will see that they beat up a Christian woman and her mother, threw stun grenades at them. Settlers and soldiers stole her farm, sent her to prison. She's on her way to the United States to do a speaking tour.
Settlers and soldiers, but this is what I'm saying. It's like I'm getting confused. Settlers, that's not the IDF. These are people with a different kind of agenda. In other words, this is not about defeating Hamas. This is a separate issue.
Yeah. So in the West Bank, I'd say you're right. It's not about Hamas. You have to ask yourself, but the settlers were protected by IDF soldiers. And Eric, and I'm with you, and it's hard to understand. But what's even harder for me to understand is the silence of the church in the West to the persecution of our co-religionists.
Well, simply, Jason, I'll tell you why, because it's confusing and you're not really helping me understand this. Now, we're friends, right? So I'm just telling you, I want to understand what's going on. I get more confused by this. In other words, it's one thing. The reason people are being silent, if anything, is because you want to understand what's going on, right? In other words, Hamas has to be defeated. They've tortured and killed and raped, many, many people. They've just killed a bunch of hostages. This is war. This is horrifying. So when you talk about this concept of Jews killing Christians or something, it really isn't computing for me. In other words, it just seems
the first attack on St. Porphyria's Church killed 18 Christian children. The first attack, Hamas wasn't there. There was no explanation given. Wouldn't
the obvious explanation be that they thought Hamas was there? In other words, I'm just trying to be logical.
But they directly bombed a church that was filled with refugees, Christian refugees. The entire
so the IDF did this. The IDF
twice.
Okay.
So Eric, I'll share with you. There's a young man who works for me. His name is Khalil. Khalil is a Catholic young man from Gaza. He was at Catholic University when the war started. He was actually working for a Christian Zionist organization. He's a Palestinian man. His sister was killed, 18 years old, by the IDF with her mother. Her mother didn't die. She died. His father died. Less than 2 weeks ago, his family church, St. Porphyrius, was bombed again. His other sister was wounded. Then yesterday, Laura Lomer on Twitter attacks him because he was highlighting the attacks on Christians. This is the Palestinian man who worked for a Christian Zionist organization. And then Laura Lomer goes after him, talking about how Muhammad's a pedophile and what would you know about good or evil? And he just replies simply, I'm a Christian. it is hard for us to wrap our mind around.
Well,
the
but we're
abuse
not
that
wrapping our mind around it, Jason, because you have to explain it. In other words, you have to tell me this is intentional, that Benjamin Netanyahu wants
either
to
it's
get Christians
intentional,
out. What?
either it's intentional, or they are the most unprofessional military the world has ever known. Either they have accidentally destroyed 90% of the Christian families' homes. I've got video on our website of IDF soldiers raiding Christian homes and dancing around in the underwear of Christian women. This is just, I was there, Eric. I went and I interviewed the families. I set up a clandestine studio in Cairo. We evacuated Christians from the church that were wounded, and women and pregnant women. We interviewed them on their experiences, and it was very hard for me to believe. And if you want me to guess what is Israel's motive in singling out the Christian communities of northern Gaza, I can tell you what I think. The Muslims have fled. The Christians have nowhere to go because that's where they're from. They're the descendants of the Jews and others that accepted Jesus Christ. They're the descendants of those who walked with Jesus Christ. And they have no intention of leaving northern Gaza. And so they would rather die in place. So then why would Israel be targeting Mother Teresa's convents, bombing every church, every hospital, every Christian school and university? Everyone has been bombed. This is a fact. Then if I were to understand why would they do this and risking losing really their only ally in the world, evangelical Christians in the English-speaking world? Why would they risk this? And I would say they mean to ethnically cleanse northern Gaza, and Christians are not going to leave. And the church in the West, if we're silent or we become apologists and we don't look, when I opposed the invasion of Iraq, I was attacked. And I said that if we invade Iraq, this is where my relationship with Zmirak began, it would lead to the ethnic cleansing of Christians, Yazidis, and others. It's exactly what happened. It wasn't that I was pro-Saddam. It's that I was pro-vulnerable ethnic and religious minorities in Iraq. And by highlighting the abuses of the tragic mistakes that the IDF is making in processing this war, it's not my organization, Eric, as you know, we have armed guards outside of synagogues across the world. We pay for that. I have armed guards. I install security cameras wherever any religious community is threatening violence. We try to seek in and protect them. And I would like to make clear the loudest and clearest voices on this are coming from within Israel, Israelis themselves, and Jews from around the world in the United States. And I do fear Jew hatred and the rise of anti-Semitism. And that's why it's challenging to tell the truth.
Hang on a second. There's much more here. Going to a hard break. Much more on this obviously vitally important subject with our friend Jason Jones. Don't go away. Folks, welcome back. I'm talking to my friend Jason Jones about what is happening in Israel. And Jason, other than from you, I'm not hearing about this kind of thing. It's very disturbing. It's very confusing because most of us would say Hamas has to be defeated. They are evil, sadistic, cruel. They're not somebody we're going to sympathize with. But you're kind of complicating it. You are complicating it by giving us evidence that there are forces within Israel that are targeting Christians and that are participating in what we're calling ethnic cleansing. What I don't get is that does that seem within the character of Benjamin Netanyahu? In other words, I find it's surprising to me to think that he would be okay with what you're describing.
You know, Eric, I wrote an article called "I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot," came out a couple of weeks ago. And in it, I was actually addressing someone said to me, Jason, are you worried that in advocating for the Palestinian civilians, you'll be called an anti-Semite? And I said, no, I have no worry about anyone thinking I'm an anti-Semite. And then I sort of did an examination of my own conscience and realized I do actually hold to bigotry around this issue, but my bigotry would be more anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian. But despite my prejudices, I was in Egypt. My teams are in and out of Gaza. I've done the interviews. I see the evidence every day. Now, what is to the character of Netanyahu? Something else that makes it harder. Probably like you, I've had breakfast with this guy 10 times in my life. I have friends in the IDF and friends who are settlers. And so it's challenging when you run an organization like mine, just like when I had to speak out against Obama's drone war, because we do have a special relationship with Israel. And as a conservative Christian, I have long-term friendships with people who are passionately concerned for Israel's security, as I am. But I just can't deny the facts. If the United States processed a war that killed 15,000 children, and only, in a community of, that's half children, if we destroyed 90% of the buildings in a city, if we drop more bombs than we dropped in Hiroshima, and then you hear things like from conservative commentators like Eric Erickson and even members of Congress saying things like use flatten Gaza, Gaza should look like Nagasaki or Hiroshima. Well, I have, there was that congressman from Michigan. He was a former evangelical pastor. I forget his name. He came out and said Gaza should look like Nagasaki. Well, congratulations. Gaza looks very much like Nagasaki. I was with the Peshmerga as they liberated Iraq from ISIS, and it looks worse than Iraqi cities after ISIS. The 15,000 dead children, that's actually over 16,000 as of today. Children have died in Gaza. This war has been processed ham-fisted. Either it's been reckless and ham-fisted, or the only other option is it's deliberate ethnic cleansing. Now, I don't want to weaponize history, and I don't want to go into the past. You can weaponize history on either side of this debate, and all the communities here are vulnerable. And in fact, as you said, we want it to be simple. The one thing you can't say about the Middle East is there's nothing simple in the Middle East. And it's actually an extremely, Israel and Palestine and Gaza, these are very ethnically, and there's religious diversity. You have Samaritans, you have Druze, you have Orthodox, you have Catholics, you have Jews, and they've been living there together for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. It's very complex. What we do is we have ideologies that have been prepackaged and sold to the conservative movement specifically to try to make what's complex simple. And it's just not simple. What is simple for me as a Christian, I really believe, is that the foundation of solidarity in the world is solidarity between Christians. So as a Christian in the United States, I should be very thoughtful and prayerful. Paul's letters, over 70% of the time when he tells us to pray and fast, it's for the persecuted church. And so when I pray and fast, it's for the persecuted church. Oftentimes I'm recognized for my work in defending other religions, whether it's Yazidi or Jews or Muslims. But it would be really hypocritical and suspect of me if I could speak for other religious communities and not the body of Christ, because standing with Christians is really the foundation of solidarity in the world, because Christians are the foundation of solidarity in the world.
But I'm still trying, this is always my thing, is I'm trying to understand this, right? In other words, I'm trying to understand, why would Israel do this? It doesn't really make sense to me. You know, there's one thing to assert that this is happening, but I'm trying to understand why they would do this. I think Israel knows that evangelical Christians, for sure, are their friends. What do you suppose is going on? This is, to me, the real issue. What is going on?
Well, Eric, you're asking, I had a guest on my podcast the week before, the month before October 7th. He was a Harvard professor, a rabbi, and considered the #1 legal scholar in Israel. And we were talking about the Supreme Court controversy and Netanyahu's reforming the Supreme Court. And I actually agreed with Netanyahu's reforms, but it was pushing Israel to the brink of civil war. In fact, this spokesperson said that, or this professor said that he believed there would be a civil war in October in Israel. Then October 7th happens. There are a lot of voices in Israel that says Netanyahu isn't making a deal for the hostages because when the war ends, he fears he's going to prison. I don't know. I don't know his motives. But here's what I know, Eric. I can promise you. And first of all, I'm so grateful for you to have me on the show to discuss this. And it's even uncomfortable for me to talk to you about this because for very good reason, you have been a very strong and clear voice for the defense of the people of Israel, because I do believe that a place for the Jews is essential for their survival. But at the same time, I'm not going to allow that truth to blind me to the needs of the people of Gaza and the West Bank.
Hang on a second. We'll be right back talking to Jason Jones. Welcome back, folks. Talking to our friend Jason Jones. You can find him at vulnerablepeopleproject.com. He's been writing about what we're talking about at vulnerablepeopleproject.com. So, Jason, again, I want to understand, what do we think is going on? In other words, do we think maybe Netanyahu is cynically, he's aware that serious Christians are going to side with him and with Israel against Hamas, obviously, and that perhaps in the fog of war, we're going to overlook what he is allowing to happen on the ground, which you're calling ethnic cleansing. I mean, is that a possible interpretation?
Yeah, I think, and that's a good assumption on Netanyahu's part. We're silent on the violence, the ethno-nationalist violence against Christians in India. We were silent as the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, and the Proto-Semitic people, the Yazidis, were wiped off the face of the earth in Iraq. So why would he think for one moment Christians would speak out for the first century Christian community of Gaza? In fact, I had a prominent Catholic journalist who's a friend of mine say, Jason, don't you understand? These aren't really Christians in Gaza. They've been Arabized. And I said to her, well, don't you understand? You might not be a real Christian. You've just been Europeanized. When you look at the first century Christians of Gaza with their bells and their incense and their icons, one has to understand these are the literal descendants of the Christians that were in the upper room when the Holy Spirit came upon them. And who was in the upper room? Jew, Arab, Africans, Asians, Greeks, Romans, and the descendants of the first century Christians. We call those people the Palestinians, and they are Christians. And so we should stand with them and be a voice for them. Benjamin Netanyahu, why would he think for 1 minute the church in the West, especially in the Anglosphere, in the United States, the UK, why would he think for 1 minute we would raise our voice for Arab Christians? Like Laura Lomer probably couldn't even wrap her mind around the idea that there are Palestinian Christians when she was tweeting out at this young man who lost his sister,
the kind of Christianity we're talking about, this is the church in which I was raised. The Greek Orthodox Church is extremely similar to the kinds of a Christian faith that you're describing. And so, yes, it doesn't look like megachurch evangelical Christianity. And so it's possible that there are people, for whom this is just too confusing and they don't know what to think. But I still have to try to understand, is it possible that Netanyahu and others in Israel want to get Christians out of Israel? And this is, to me, what seems the hardest pill to swallow, the idea that people that you think of as your friends would be behaving like this. But do you suppose that they're using this as an opportunity to get rid of Christians? And why do they want to get rid of Christians? Do they not pride themselves on being a society of heterogeneity, of diversity? I mean, that to me is, it's like New York City. It's like America. I would think that they would pride themselves on that, but it seems to me like maybe they're not. Again, I don't know. I'm trying to process what you're
Israel
saying.
is not a monolithic community, and you have people from the far right to the far left and everything in between. And so there is a strain of Zionism that I find very appealing and attractive and beautiful, that people like Hannah Arendt came from, that saw a place for the Jews living in harmony with Christians and Muslims and Arabs. And of course, there's a large segment of Israeli society that they're Zionists, but they are, they descend from sort of the Zionism of Hannah Arendt. But I think when you have a brutal, shocking attack like we saw on October 7th, and in fact, I wrote in my article, I'm an anti-Palestinian bigot. The very first thought that went through my mind when I saw the video footage of October 7th, to my shame, was literally, Eric, flatten Gaza. That went through my mind. But of course, I'm a Christian man, and I have lots of thoughts that go through my mind, and I have to look at them in horror and say, how did I think that? So I completely understand that when you have a small community that's embattled that the being swept by violent enthusiasms is something that Rene Girard would say is completely natural. What I want to do as a Christian, whether it's in Israel, in Iraq, in Nigeria, or in India, is to live in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world. We see the rise of Christianity in India specifically because it celebrates the dignity of women and it obliterates the caste system. So we see my organization has a school for the Dalit, considered untouchable and subhuman. And we love being able to tell them, not only are you not subhuman, that you are made in the image and likeness of God. What a dramatic change in self-perception. So rather than try to understand the motives of Israel, what I would like to do is plead with Israel. We should ask for a few things. Number one, stop bombing churches. Please commit that you will not bomb churches. There are less than 800 Christians left in northern Gaza. I would like to see them brought to the West Bank and till the war is over with a commitment that they would be allowed to return. Also, Christians in Israel should have some protections. Why is it legal to spit on Christians in Jerusalem? Things like this are very weird traditions and customs. Why do priests have to suffer abuse and not be legally protected from assault in this manner? So yes, we are Israel's best friend. I would like to see Israel reciprocate. They should reciprocate with a commitment to protecting Christians. They should reciprocate by committing to not bomb churches. They should reciprocate by saying, not only are we going to be very careful in not targeting Christians, but we're going to do our very best to protect civilians. We're going to discipline our soldiers who are on TikTok dancing in Palestinian women's underwear. The United States military, I'm a former infantryman. I'm taking my son to the recruiter today, my 18-year-old. My oldest son was in the military. We're a military family. You would never see an American soldier on TikTok wearing Iraqi women's underwear, dancing around without being court-martialed and sent to prison. But these videos are streaming into TikTok and Instagram, and this is undermining this is very bad public diplomacy. But unless the evangelical church in the English-speaking countries like the United States and Britain speaks out, I fear nothing will happen.
And that's why we have had you on the show today to talk about this. Folks, this is dark stuff, but we need to know what's happening. My friend Jason Jones, thank you so much. Folks, go to vulnerablepeopleproject.com, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. Thank you. Discover Noble Gold Investment.
Okay, so right there you could tell that Eric was not comfortable with that conversation. He also respects Jason Jones. And I really love the way Jason is using kind of soft gloves. I mean, he brought up stuff that Eric absolutely needs to hear and needs to understand. You could tell Eric with every fiber of his being did not want to understand it. He would say, I'm just trying to understand. I want to understand. Help me understand. But the truth is that was a deflective mechanism to say, like, I can't understand this. This doesn't fit my paradigm. And, you know, I would love to know if someone like Eric or Eric himself has any actual familiarity with the modern day religion of Judaism, with the Talmud being one of the most important works, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia. It's the most important work of Judaism today, and it hates Christ. It hates Christianity. I've read the sections on Jesus Christ. I bought an entire book, called Jesus in the Talmud. It talks all about, and it's not hateful toward Jews. Let me make that clear. It's not hateful toward Jews, not anti-Semitic, whatever. But does Eric have any understanding of the Talmud of Kabbalah where they play both sides? Has he ever heard Netanyahu's actual quotes after 9/11 saying this is really good for Israel? Has he ever heard Netanyahu talk about, the way that he can control America and Americans' thinking? Other things I'd like to ask: does he know about the Irgun and the Stern Gang and their bombing of the King David Hotel, where they dressed up like Arabs and they took out like 120 people that day, trying to pretend that it was Arabs? Does he know about the whole thing with JFK? That JFK was in a fight with the original Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, and he was trying to also make AIPAC register as a foreign agent, and JFK winds up dead. The USS Liberty incident. Candace Owens did a phenomenal show yesterday that I've posted. It's the previous video to this one. Meeting with one of the survivors of the USS Liberty when Israel attacked one of our most prolific warships back in, I believe it was 1967. And they basically were, I mean, they were trying to sink the whole ship. And they were trying to pretend that it was Egypt that did it because they wanted us, once again, to draw us into a war on their behalf. But it didn't work out because a lot of men died. A lot of soldiers actually lived, and they were given gag orders. Don't ever speak about this. Does Eric know about that? I'd love to know if he does. Does he understand about the Project for a New American Century and the minds that were behind that? I won't get into that here. 9/11, Larry Silverstein and the other owner, I can't think of his name, who were highly, highly involved with Israel. And they always showed up to the trade centers every single day, and their family. And that day they decided not to go. And they used the money given from the insurance agents to build schools for Shin Bet and Mossad. Like, come on, like there was pre-knowledge here. The improbability of Hamas orchestrating October 7th without Israel's implicit allowance to do so, and also the stoking of the fires of Islamic extremism. So I could go on and on and on, but these are the kind of things that these leaders, I think that they are absolutely insulated. I think some of them know, some of them are just greedy and are playing into the whole New World Order thing through the Zionist channel. But I really, after watching this with Eric, I really don't think he knows. And I think most people, aside from Jason Jones, are just incredibly afraid to approach him. It's like telling the boss, news about a competitor that he really does not want to hear. It's just better to not be the messenger. Don't kill the messenger, right? So I appreciate Jason Jones being the messenger in that case. I think a lot of Eric for having him back on recently. And I encourage, if you guys enjoyed that episode, you should watch Eric's new interview with Jason Jones. And there's a segment that dropped today. So on Rumble, you can find it, the Eric Metaxas Show. And they're talking about Syria. But it's really cool that Eric, in that episode toward the end, he says, I've got to admit, when it comes to what happened after 9/11 and our response and George Bush's response regarding Saddam Hussein and how we went to war, he was like, I thought the left was nuts because they were saying you'll get us tied up in an endless war, and I made fun of them. And he's like, now I realize I was wrong. I was wrong. And I think that that's a great first step for Eric. Because again, when it comes to social policy, social politics, religious beliefs about various things, man, me and Eric couldn't probably be more alike. We're very alike. But when it comes to this Zionism issue and the history of Israel, either he doesn't know, and he should know because he's writing books that align with the topic all the time, or he does know and doesn't care because it's lucrative. And I hate to say that, and I don't think that's true of Eric. But I've learned a lot from Jason Jones and his heart toward people he disagrees with, the way that he had that conversation. Eric would never have trusted him if Jason was not, didn't have his bona fides in conservatism already. I mean, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, he got arrested for protesting COVID. He got arrested outside of a Planned Parenthood. He's done all kinds of pro-life work. He was working again on the Trump campaign. So this guy is not some left-wing liberal, I just want to save the world and help the world. He does help the world, but he's truthful about what he sees. So yeah, I can't wait for my show with Jason Jones tomorrow, Vulnerable People Project founder, and look forward to you guys tuning in. I believe that show I'm going to run it in the evening. I have not decided on the exact time yet, but look out for that show. It'll be out tomorrow. And again, all love to Eric Metaxas. If he watches this, I just think that there's some growth that needs to happen there. And I never thought I would say it to a guy like him. So anyway, thank you guys for watching J Slay Made in the USA. I'll talk to you again soon.